The US dollar status is severely in jeopardy. The government can weaponize their monetary system against the individuals. You need to get and hold wealth outside of the system. Absolutely, 100%.
Please join us for our next live stream, Sunday, March 13th at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll go over current events, past guests, and of course, gold and silver news. Once again, our next live stream will be Sunday, March 13th, 9 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. Lynette Zang from ITM Trading joins us today. Lynette has held the position of Chief Market Analyst at ITM Trading since 2002. She has been a banker and a stockbroker, and she has studied world currencies since 1987. Lynette believes strongly that we need to be as independent as possible, and at the same time, we need to come together as a community in order to survive and thrive through hyperinflation. Her motto is food, water, energy, security, community, barter ability, and wealth preservation. And we're delighted to have Lynette join us once again today. It's time to saddle up and silver up for Lynette Zang. Lynette, welcome back to SBTV. How are you doing?
I am doing great. I'm very happy to be here, Patrick.
Happy to have you again. A lot in the world has changed since we last had you on.
Yes.
With so many things on everyone's plates with what's going on, I'd like to start with the word misdirection, a word you recently used on a video at ITM Trading. We have a pandemic, we have a war, we have the Fed supposedly tapering, oil rising, we have inflation, and I often say we have to keep our head on a swivel, but has the media got our heads spinning so severely that people may not know what to focus on anymore?
Oh, 100%. And that's why I said it's all misdirection. And you can see we've lurched from crisis to crisis to crisis. So look over here while the real action is what's happening to the monetary system. And, we've all got to be ready for the reset. So, yeah, 100%. If they can swivel you enough, then what that happens is you just shut down. You can't do anything, and therefore you don't really protect yourself. And that's what happens. You just kind of go along.
China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao said, and I quote, "China must do everything possible this year to spur domestic consumption," end quote, which may mean China's once export-driven economy is now going to focus more on supplying and building the homeland more than abroad, which could put more kinks in the supply chain. So I just want to ask you, what happens to the U.S. economy and even other economies throughout the world if that supply chain should never get back to what it was?
Well, that's such an interesting question, and one that I've actually been thinking about a lot, because I was a new stockbroker in the 80s, and all you heard about was globalization, globalization, globalization. And I remember thinking to myself then, yeah, this may not be such a great thing. And so what you're referring to and what we are witnessing happening, and even in the State of the Union address the other night, is talking about bringing a lot of those critical services local again. Well, why were they shipped off to begin with, right? I mean, how old was I? I was like 30 years old. What did I know? I was just a term would be pisher. I was, young, and I didn't really know that much about the world yet. But I could see the problems that would arise when you ship all of your jobs overseas and then you ship all your supply chains overseas. Then you're really counting on what's happening now, the breakdown of the whole system, not happening. And that really started in 2008. So we're just seeing the end result of it. But I think a blind monkey could have seen that coming, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, because I think it's going to be difficult for the U.S. now. I mean, if you look at things like raw materials, they have gotten more expensive. And then if the U.S. is to manufacture again, how do they then afford it? I mean, again, it's the raw materials, it's the cost of labor and things like that. It would be impossible to be competitive.
Right. We have to build that whole infrastructure again, because once we shipped out all the jobs, the mechanics, the infrastructure that supported those jobs also declined. So it's a huge, you're absolutely right, Patrick. It's a huge job and a huge crisis that we're facing that people don't even see. They don't even realize. But, you know, there is a shift that's happening in the world reserve currency as well. And that's all part of what you're talking about here with the supply chains. Because if we go local, you know, part of it is that in the SWIFT system, which is the global payment system for US dollars, right? If countries are becoming more self-sufficient, which they have to be, and China's been working on that for a while to build their own demand system internally, then yeah, that is a threat. The breakdown of the entire supply chain system, and then what's happening between with Russia in the SWIFT system being kicked out, etc., that really puts a lot of pressure on the US dollar as the world reserve currency, and we're going to suffer more from that than anybody else in the world, frankly.
You know, speaking about the SWIFT system, part of the reason why the world wants to de-dollarize and get away from the US dollar is because of that weaponizing of the SWIFT system via things like sanctions. And as you mentioned, the US cut Russia off of the SWIFT system, and this now means Russian payments via the SWIFT system, will cease. However, on the other half of this, there are creditors who are expecting payments from Russian businesses and banks. What happens to those creditors? And this is something you touched on in a recent video that you put up on ITM Trading.
Mm-hmm. And also something that Zoltan Pozar of Credit Suisse is also talking about. This is a tremendous issue that is going to have reverberating, it's going to reverberate throughout the whole global system because we are incestuously interconnected. And so the question is, are we going to have another Lehman moment, which was when Lehman could no longer make their payments, and then that toppled the whole system. I mean, it killed the system is what it did. And so, that is such an incredibly important point. If Russia and the corporations in Russia cannot make those payments, then it's really like a domino effect. How's that going to affect the corporations that were expecting those payments? How's it going to affect the people from that were expecting the payments from those corporations, and on and on and on? Yeah, this could be, I believe that we have already started the hyperinflationary phase. This is endgame. This is no doubt about it. This is endgame.
You brought up a great point about 2008 with what happened then, and then we saw that the Fed had to provide liquidity, as they did back during this crisis as well. If so, knowing the Fed may have to provide liquidity once again, what does this then do to their plans to taper and raise rates?
Okay, I got to ask you, do you really think that they actually planned to taper and raise rates? Because when they tried to do that in 2016, it was a big fat fail. In fact, every single country that has made that attempt since 2008 has made a big fat fail. So absolutely zero countries have been able to do it. So they can talk about it, and they can hope that the markets participate. And he even said, Powell did say in his interview yesterday that, you know, the markets had cooperated to look at where interest rates are. But the reality is it was already in 2013 that the 10-year Treasury, that underpins the entire global market, was already handed over to traders. Traders don't give a crap about a lot of things. They just care about the profits. So, This is huge. Huge. It's everything. I mean,
Okay.
it's the end of the system.
Yeah, I agree, and in fact, we even had Paul saying that it is possible to have more than one reserve currency. What did you think when you heard that?
Oh my God. Well, he knows. He knows very well that the US dollar as well, I keep saying the world reserve currency. That really has not been true since 99. But yeah, and in fact, I think that the world reserve currency is going to end up being the SDR, which can contain a component of each currency in the world, because that's what it's made up of, just currencies, and they've said many times. So yeah, I think Powell absolutely 100% knows that the US dollar status is severely in jeopardy. And the world knows that it's easy enough for the US to weaponize the SWIFT system against them if we don't like what they're doing. Just like Canada showed us that the government can weaponize their monetary system against the individuals. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I want people to get, is that, take a look at what's happening in the weaponization of these systems and realize that you are not immune to it. So you better get ready for it.
Lynette, is the world correct, or is the world right in wanting to remove itself from the U.S. monetary dominance, de-dollarization?
Well, in one word, I would say yes, and that's because of the abuse of power, but also because the dollar officially has 3 cents left in purchasing power out of that original dollar, rapidly going to zero. Because you made such a great point, is what tools do the central banks have left to try and stimulate the economy or get us, like they did in 2008, what they did in 2020 was so much bigger than what they did. You look at the graph, it looks like 2008 looks like nothing, right? But it was a lot then. Went from 800 billion to 2 trillion. Now we're at like 9 trillion. And what do they have? All they have is to go ahead and, print more money or take interest rates into negative territory, which actually they already are, just nominally they're not. Because when you've got official 7.5% inflation, but you're looking at a 2% bond, you're actually minus 5.5%. That's what you're actually getting paid, real rates. And that inflation's not going away. I don't care what he says. It is not transitory, even though they stopped using transitory. He expects inflation to drop the end of this year, second half of this year. Yeah, okay. Tell me why. Why do you think it's going to fall? Right? I mean, there's so many numbers, like housing numbers, the rent goes into it, but the owner equivalent rent is not in those inflation numbers yet. Those lie ahead of us. And then all of this oil and natural gas explosion impacts food and everything. So I think it's for him to say that's garbage, frankly.
If you're enjoying this interview with Lynette Zang from ITM Trading and I, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and giving us a thumbs up to let the algos know you want more content like this. And if you want to learn more about systemic wealth protection, please visit us at www.silverbullion.com.sg. Yeah, I agree there. I think even if the percentage of inflation goes down, prices may not.
Yeah, gasoline, prices at the pump, they haven't really responded to this huge run-up that we've had. $120 intraday is pretty high, right? Yeah, intraday. So we'll see where it closes. But, inflation is here to stay. I think we've entered the period of hyperinflation myself. I think we have.
Lynette, with what we're seeing going on right now and how countries want to break away from the dollar, is it at all possible for the US dollar to be removed or replaced peacefully?
No, I do not see. I know that Powell said that he thinks he can engineer a soft landing. No, there will be no soft landing. No, I do not see that. Part of the reason why I say that is back in 1969, when we were setting up to go off the gold standard, they set up the all of the mechanisms to make that transition. And so they set up what they call the substitution fund. And the substitution fund is a place where anybody outside of the U.S. can deposit their dollar-denominated assets, and then they are washed and converted into SDR-denominated assets. And the theory behind that was so that they could then regulate the rate and speed that those dollars returned to the U.S. and cause that inflation. But if you have a central bank that is just creating, trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of untold dollars, then that would easily, and the rest of the world is rushing to get out of those dollars, then those dollars have to come back. Even if they put them in the substitution fund, then they're going to lose control of the speed at which those come back on shore. Especially at the same time, for those countries that have created alternative payment systems rely more on those systems than they do on the U.S.'s SWIFT system. So no, I think this is going to be a very, very, very hard landing. Very hard.
Yeah, okay. You brought up a good point about the SDR, because it seems like the whole world is looking at, maybe the Chinese yuan being the next reserve currency. But the SDR is still there in the rear view mirror if people take a look at it. And something like the SDR, it's used for global trade. But what would people use for local currency? And I'm asking this because if something had to replace the US dollar globally, would the US dollar be of value locally?
Well, they need to keep the name of the U.S. dollar just like they have through every transition, and they have to keep the look really similar, whether it's digital or physical, whatever, so that people don't realize the transition. So there will be, just like the digital dollar, there will be a dollar because people marry the legal money of the state, and they cannot imagine that the dollar could possibly go away. So in name, it'll be retained, but what it is will be completely different, just like it has been, really, since they created the dollar system to begin with.
Okay, you mentioned the word transition. You mentioned digital dollar, and I guess this leads into central bank digital currencies. Are you comfortable with that? Do we fully understand what a central bank digital currency might mean?
Oh, I don't think most people even really pay attention, quite honestly. But what that is a programmable money. And right now, when a central bank, when the Federal Reserve creates a policy, it takes a certain period of time to work through the whole system before they know the result of that policy. Once we have a central bank digital currency, they can see in real time whether or not they can see how their policy is impacting people in real time. And, it is possible that they would, you're not spending enough. It's a consumer-driven economy. Globally, as you pointed out with China, that's moving more in that way too. So when a central bank wants you to spend money and you're not doing it fast enough, all they do is push you more into negative rates. You're sitting there watching your principal evaporate, because that's what negative rates do. They attack your principal. When all the purchasing power is gone, then the only thing left is your principal. That's where we are. They got to attack your principal. If you're sitting there watching your principal evaporate and you're not shopping, what are you likely to do? You're likely to go shop and put it into anything that could possibly retain its value more. But we're coming up into a world, even with the CBDCs, where they hold all of the data on all of your holdings and therefore all the title on your holdings. The goal is for you to spend all of your equity, because then you can't blame anybody for taking it away from you, right? Then you did that to yourself. But yeah, CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, scare the Hades out of me. And the interesting thing is, we're still studying them, and yet in, what was it, 2019, I believe? I could be off on the date, maybe it was 2020, but it was October where they actually put all of those accounts out. We all have FedNow accounts, so that when they want to, the excuse was, well, look at how much easier it would be to put stimulus money into an account by a button push versus sending out all those checks or putting it or doing those wires, etc. So they're setting up to take our principal and to get us comfortable with those digital dollars. But that is 100% about control and tracking every single thing that you do. And I'm still of an age where I like my privacy. Even though I'm on air, I still like my privacy.
You know, Lynette, with all these changes coming, can people really take this much change? Are they even ready for this much change where their money may not exist as they know it?
No, they're never ready for it. And our job is to get about 3% of the population ready for it, because then maybe we can have a fair system or a more fair system on the other side of this. You know, I mean, you and I work, and we work hard, and we try and, you know, after we pay our bills, whatever we have left over, we're trying to accumulate. Me, I don't think I'm ever going to retire. I mean, at one point I thought I would, but that's like long gone. I don't know when I'll ever retire, but people do try to save for large events in their life, whether it's educating their children or it's retiring or it's just, you know, planning. For me, leaving a legacy is really important. And if you're doing it in something that is completely controlled by a central bank, then you only get to accumulate what they think they want you to accumulate. And it's that nominal confusion, right? So you're looking at the stock market going up and you think, well, this is great because look at the stock market is going up. So that's a good thing because we've been trained that a rising stock market means a healthy economy. It's not true anymore, but that's the training, right? When in reality, as the real trend is what's happening in the purchasing power of the currencies. So with every time a central banker prints money, the currency that's already out there loses value. And when it goes to zero, you can have $1 trillion stock market, but it still equals zero because it has no purchasing power. It has no value. And that happens when all confidence is lost, and confidence has been declining for a long time now.
Yeah, you know, speaking of the central banks, Ron Paul had said something along the lines of it's no coincidence that the century of total war coincided with the century of central banking. And you pointed out in a recent video how the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and then the next year we had World War I. And after World War II, the U.S. was given power of the world's monetary system via Bretton Woods. And the question I have now, though, is coming to where we are now at this time in history, the Russia-Ukraine war or another war in the future, will it be installed until the U.S. is finally removed from its monetary dominance?
Well, it's got to stay in play long enough to justify the hyperinflation, right? That's really, because that's when we shift into a new global monetary regime. And who's the real lender of last resort? This is why China, I don't think China wants it. They don't need it. You know, the SDR, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, whose members are all treasury secretaries and central bank chiefs of almost every country in the world, but they're all unelected officials. I mean, that's who's going to be governing. So do I think the war will last until the shift? I think the war will last to justify the hyperinflation. You know, just like the last crisis justified more QE, which hasn't stopped yet, right? Even they could talk about it, but, you know, like my daddy, do what I say and not what I do. Actions speak way louder than words. So we can see that. I don't know that the war has to last that long. I think it just needs to last long enough to devastate all the currencies in the world, and it will, because it's going to justify the hyperinflation.
Lynette, you know, with where we are today and eventually where we are going to, how important is it for people to understand that you and I and all of us should all be personally diversifying our wealth and assets and possibly even de-dollarize?
Well, I personally have, I live in the U.S. and I have de-dollarized as much as I possibly can, because whenever I get those dollars, I convert it into something that's real. I don't personally have any money in the stock markets or the bond markets. Yes, I do have a level of cash because that's outside of the system. So on top of what you just said, I think it's critically important for people to decurrency wherever they are, whether it's dollars or euros or yen or whatever it may be. I think Canada showed you the importance of holding real wealth outside of the system that you can access, but they can't. Remember, this is the only financial asset that runs no counterparty risk, according to the Bank for International Settlements. No counterparty risk, the only financial asset. So I think it's critical for people to, you know, to make sure that they can weather this storm with food, water, energy, security, barterability, which for me is silver, wealth preservation, which for me is gold, community, and shelter. Because as community, which is what you and I are doing right now, we need to come together, because there are more of us than there are of them, and together we are stronger, and we bring those different skill sets like we have talked about. The different skill sets, everybody brings something to the table, and we all need to come together to help each other. And that's critical. Right. And you need to get you need to get and hold wealth outside of the system. Absolutely, 100%.
Speaking of that, I'd like to ask you, how are things at ITM? And mainly because, you know, we see some volatility with gold and silver, but we don't really see much of it on the news. So, you know, people are kind of wondering, you know, have people stopped buying physical gold and silver? So how are things at ITM?
Well, we just finished our best year, and we're entering what I expect to be another best year. So it's a wake-up call. Just like March and April of 2020 was a wake-up call for me, the whole in my strategy, and I went and got a bug-out space. I think that what's really happening is starting to open people's eyes who were closed. So we're doing quite well, selling quite a lot of both gold and silver in all forms, right? Because that's what we do. But a lot more people are calling for the strategy. How do I get through where we are? Because it's so much more than just owning gold and silver. But from a monetary base, yeah, you got to have gold, you got to have silver, you got to have cash outside of the system, where they can't just go, nope, we don't like you, you're done.
Lynette Zang from ITM Trading. Before we wrap up, can you let our viewers know how they can follow you to get more of your views and the services that they can find at ITM Trading?
Absolutely. First of all, we have a website, itmtrading.com, and then we have a large YouTube channel, which is, you can also either Google my name, Lynette Zang, or ITM Trading, and it will come up. And in fact, Patrick, which we didn't talk about yet, just briefly, we just did a very soft launch of a new channel called Beyond Gold and Silver, where we talk about the rest of the mantra, because people need to be prepared in every single way. And what we specialize at ITM is creating that strategy to help you not just survive what we're going through, and the goal is to maintain your standard of living as much as possible, because everybody's going to feel this. I don't really care where you are or who you are. But in addition, you want to be able to build your wealth and come out the other side of this mess in actually a much better position than you're entering it. And anybody can do that. So that's what we like to do at ITM Trading. And I mean, they can even call us at 888-696-4653. And we also like to do a lot of things in person and take care of you in person. So, we're very hands-on, and we really like to take good care of our clients for the whole duration, not just for a minute.
All right, I'm going to have to head on over to that YouTube site and be a subscriber. Lynette Zang, we thank you for your time. We all do appreciate what you're doing, the time you put in, and the honesty, being genuine with us all. So we want to thank you for that, and I hope we can do this again soon.
It's my pleasure, and always, Patrick, you're one of my favorite people.
All right, thanks, Lynette. You're one of our favorites, too. We really do appreciate it. That was Lynette Zang sharing her views on the economy, geopolitics, and precious metals. For more info on Lynette, please visit itmtrading.com. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share to let the algos know you want to see more of our content. Audio-only versions of this interview can be found on iTunes and Spotify.